So first, can you give me your reaction to Speaker Pelosi initiating these impeachment proceedings?
Right. The House has decided to go down the impeachment path, and obviously they're under a lot of pressure, I think, from individual members, from their political base to do it. But I frankly think it makes more sense to wait till we have all the information, all the facts. We saw the transcript of the call today to Ukraine. We're going to get the whistleblower testimony sometime later today or tomorrow. But I think the House has proceeded down this path in a way that it probably would have made a lot more sense for them if they had waited just to get the facts and the information. And we'll see where it leads. But I think they're very anxious to rush to judgment. I think they're under a lot of pressure to do this. And again, I think at this point it would make sense for all of us to take a deep breath and just wait and see where the facts lead.
Have you looked at the document that was released today?
I did. I have seen it, yes.
And what's your reaction to it?
Well, I mean, the conversation that was held is a lot less than what it was hyped up to be. In other words, the House Democrats and others were talking about how there was a clear quid pro quo and that there was aid being withheld and, in exchange for some sort of a political attack on a political opponent. And I think it could be interpreted very differently than that. I think the president was raising the issue of corruption in the Ukrainian government. There was not any suggestion of an exchange of assistance for that. So I think it's a lot less than what it was hyped up to be. That being said, I'm not a fan of the way, in many cases, the president goes about this, and I would prefer that he not raise an issue like that with a foreign leader.
Right, and this wasn't an exact word-for-word transcript. It's
right.
A kind of interpretation. So are you hoping that a full transcript does come out?
I do. I think this is one of those issues where you just want all the facts. They should be as transparent as they possibly can, and then everybody will be in a better position to make a judgment, and most importantly, the American people, who ultimately, if impeachment moves forward in the House, in the end it's going to be the American people who are going to have to make some judgments about this too, because I think the question that the House has to determine is, is this reach the threshold, the constitutional threshold, for high crimes and misdemeanors? And whether or not the president did something that was inappropriate is an entirely different question than whether he did something that would reach the threshold and constitute what the House is now talking about doing, which would be an impeachment process. Right.
So have you received any other details about the whistleblower complaint?
Not really. I mean, other than what's being reported and a little bit of hearsay. We'll find out more. My understanding was that the whistleblower, was not privy to the conversation, and it was a third-hand conversation. But we won't know until we see it. And I prefer, again, not to get ahead of ourselves. And I think the House got a little bit over their skis by going out so early on this, based upon some of the early conjecture about what might have been in the transcript or what might be in the whistleblower complaint. And frankly, I just think it's important, before you make big consequential decisions like that you have all the facts in front of you. And it seems to me that that isn't at least what has happened so far in the House.
So you were in the House during President Clinton's impeachment. You voted for 3 of the 4 articles of impeachment against the president.
Right.
How do you approach this situation? You're on a different side now. You're in a different chamber, so it's a different procedure, obviously.
Right.
How do you look at this and use that experience?
Well, that's a good question. You learn from those experiences, and the House impeachment process that we went through over 20 years ago now sort of informs how I look at this now. Clearly that was a time I was fairly new to the House. It was a path that the leadership in the House decided to go down, and I did vote for 3 of the 4 articles of impeachment, and there were clear-cut violations. I mean, the president lied under oath. It was clear there was perjury there, and that he was trying to obstruct justice from being done there. This circumstance, of course, a totally different fact pattern, and I think you got to, again, let the fact pattern guide you. match it up against the law. There will be a lot of questions about whether the actions by the president violated any legality or any laws. And I'm sure that the legal experts will begin to break that down and start give us their assessments about that. But in the end, the impeachment process constitutionally, again, the requirement of the threshold is high crimes and misdemeanors, and that becomes sometimes a judgment call that is made. In 1998, as you mentioned, I did support those articles of impeachment, but I also know at the time that I think we're probably a little bit at odds with where the American people were, and they felt that although the president lied under oath at the time, that what he lied about wasn't something that he should have been impeached for, and they took out that judgment in the subsequent elections. So my guess is the American people are going to weigh in on this. I think the Democrats run the risk of what we went through in 1998, and that is, again, perhaps getting ahead of where the American people are, or out of sync with what they believe. If they think that this president is not being treated fairly, or is being singled out, or is being attacked in a partisan way, then they could come to a very different conclusion than what the House of Representatives decides to come up with in the end. And I think that's in the end, it's going to be the American people who render the ultimate judgment on this.
Right, and like you said, it could be damaging for the Democratic Party. Is this damaging to your party as well? I mean, could this be?
It's hard to assess that at this point, but I think that the Democrats run the risk, just like we did in 1998, of making judgments in response to, and I think this is their disdain, the Democrats' disdain for this president is really over the top. And they're sort of being driven by that. And I think sometimes you've got to let the facts and the law govern what you decide to do. And again, we went through this process 20 years ago. I think learned some lessons from it, but it's a whole different group of people in the House of Representatives today. And in the end, the people will decide, the people of this country, I think, on whether or not this president did something that reaches that high threshold that the Constitution requires, and they'll make their own judgment about it. But if I were, I'm not. The Democrats aren't going to listen to what I have to say, and I can't, profess to give them any advice. But I do think it's fraught with a lot of risk and a lot of potential landmines when it comes to the path that they're choosing to go down. Particularly given the fact that I don't think they have all the information, all the facts in front of them.
I do have one more question about this, and then I want to ask you about the trade deal.
Yeah.
The process of the whistleblower complaint, do you think it was handled correctly? I mean, it's an important thing. Politics aside, you want whistleblowers and that process to go correctly every time for the integrity of it. So do you think it was handled correctly?
Right. Again, I think we'll find out more about that as the information comes out. My understanding is that the whistleblower, and they went to the DNI, the Department of National Intelligence, and the Department of National Intelligence, I think it made the judgment or the decision that this didn't deal with national security. It wasn't an intelligence matter, but the Inspector General at the DNI, I think. Thought it was, that it was something that needed to move forward, and I think was prepared to present it to Congress anyway. The White House then ultimately decided to make that decision to basically turn over the whistleblower complaint testimony to the Congress. I think transparency is a good thing. I've always believed that. I think there are certain elements of conversations that have intelligence sensitivities to them and national security implications about them that obviously bear on the decisions about the information that's released. But I think the decision was made by the DNI that this was not an intelligence matter and therefore could be declassified and released publicly. But you want to protect the integrity of the whistleblower process. It's there for a reason, and I don't think typically it is released to the Congress. Congress has an oversight role to play, but you want to make sure that a whistleblower, ultimately you don't expose them in a way that it discourages future whistleblowers from using that statute to draw attention to bad things that are happening in government agencies. So we'll find out more about how this all came together. My assumption is in the next few days, and perhaps weeks. But again, my argument would be, let's let the facts come out, let the information come out, and we can make judgments from that. I really think that the House got very far out there based on what I know today, and I think that's a risky strategy for them.